We're happy to connect with stakeholders and provide you with information on the program, especially as we had kind of mentioned at the outset, in times where we're all working and experiencing things or in a new way, I'd say, either as students working virtually, I think, with their school administrators, or as employees, as we work differently now with our teams, more virtually than we're used to. Things are definitely different for us at the ministry in terms of how we're working. So any additional support that we can provide to ONECA as you work through new methods as well, we're happy to do so. I'll just take that as please be patient with us if there's any kind of glitches with the presentation. This is, Zoom isn't our typical platform, but I think it should work fine. So as I had kind of mentioned, Frankie's going to give us an overview, and then we are available to answer any questions specifically about her presentation, or as Roxanne had mentioned, I know that some of the questions have already been provided to the ministry, and we will respond to those questions at the end of the presentation. And what I'm really hoping is that we can engage in a conversation about the issues that you've raised and figure out the best way to move forward within the ministry's kind of allowable directions. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Frankie, and she can give us an overview of OSAP.
Great. So Roxanne, am I going to be able to, oh, I am now the host. Okay. All right. Just bear with me as I set this up. Show a window. Okay.
And sorry, just before Frankie starts, I'll say one more thing. Just feel like we don't all have to, if you want to chime in with a joke or kind of, we aren't overly formal, so feel free to be informal if you need to.
Great. So technical stuff out of the way. Can you see my screen right now?
I can.
You can? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Frankie, are you going to be able to send me this slide deck?
Yeah, I don't see any problem with that.
Okay.
All right. So if you can see this and you can hear me, then I think we should be good to go. I will say I am known to pay the cat tax on occasion, so we might have some visitors, but that is one of the beauties of working from home. So we might have, if you see anyone interesting in the background, that's who that will be. Otherwise, we'll just get into this. So as Jennifer said, what we're going to do today is start with an overview of OSAP for the 2021 academic year. And so what we'll do is I'll give you a little bit of an overview, and I can speak to some of the targeted funding and the policies that are in place for Indigenous learners specifically. And then we can also talk a bit about what's new for this year. So you might be aware that there's a 6-month moratorium on students' loans that was announced earlier in the spring. There have been some other changes introduced by the federal government, and then we can walk through what these changes look like for Indigenous learners. And if you have any questions or certainly any technical issues, please let me know as we go. I want to make sure you can hear and see what we're doing. So for an overview of OSAP, this might be familiar to some of you, but I'll give you a bit of the high-level view of what we do with OSAP, how it works, to make sure that we're all on the same page. So what is OSAP? OSAP, or the Ontario Student Assistance Program, supports access to post-secondary education for Ontarians. I'm actually just going to, that way, in the recording, you should be able to see the presentation itself. There we go. So the Ontario Student Assistance Program supports access to post-secondary education for Ontarians by providing financial assistance to help qualified students and families with the cost of post-secondary education. So OSAP is funded by both the federal and the provincial governments through a single payment. It's what we call an integrated program. And to be eligible for OSAP, students must be a Canadian citizen, permanent resident, or protected person. They must be a resident of Ontario, and they must be attending an OSAP-approved post-secondary institution and in an eligible program. And OSAP itself is made up of grants, which is money that students keep, and loans, which is money that students would pay back. OSAP is determined by looking at the costs, the resources, and that determines the financial need. So the costs, the educational costs, include some of the direct educational costs. So they include things like tuition and fees and and books and supplies. And then we also look at the living costs. So personal living expenses, childcare and travel, as well as for the financial contribution side of it, we look at the resources. So there is an expected student fixed contribution. And we also look at the assets, the parental income, the spousal income, and spousal assets. And then, so at a very high level, you look at the costs minus the resources, and that's how you get the financial need. And the financial need is a combination of both federal and provincial funding. And certainly of interest to this table, I expect, is that it's helpful to know that for students who identify as Indigenous and provide supporting documentation to confirm their Indigenous identity, they're actually exempt from the fixed student contribution. So the $3,600, which can certainly impact their assessment. In general, the timeline for OSAP, well, I'll walk you through that. And so for 2021, the OSAP application is certainly available now, and students, if they haven't already, they can apply online at ontario.ca/OSAP. And typically what happens is a student would apply for OSAP, or they would start a year in advance of when they're actually going to school. So a year and ahead of when they're planning to go to school, they would apply to colleges and universities. And at that point, they can create an OSAP account and register for OSAP, so create their profile. And then in the spring of that year, they would be able to work through the admission process with that school and apply for OSAP and receive an estimate, so to give them a ballpark of what their OSAP could look like. And then over the summer, that student would work through providing any documentation that they need to share. So that could include their Indigenous identification documentation. There would be some documents that they need to sign. And once that's all completed, then they would receive their actual assessment. And then throughout that academic year, typically, or at the beginning of that year, they would receive the majority of their funding in the fall, and then the remainder in the winter. And you might be interested to know that there is a grant funding only option available as well. So once a student receives their assessment, they would have, once a student receives their assessment, they would be able to see this funding summary, at which point they could see what they're entitled to in terms of grant, they're able to receive in loan, and then under the loan, they would be able to, and you would be able to do this if you're working with students, you would have access to be able to click this little box here, which says, I don't want the loan, and submit it. And then they would only actually receive the grant portion. So I'm just hearing a little bit of background noise. I don't know if it's possible to mute there. All right. And then, of course, as part of the life cycle of a loan is the payment and the repayment of that loan. So while a student is in school, their loan remains interest-free. But once they leave full-time studies, then they enter into a grace period. So at which point the student has 6 months before they need to start making payments on that loan. Now, if students are having difficulty repaying that loan, they can access the repayment assistance plan. And if successful, then their loans can be, the amount of their payments can be lowered or reduced to zero based on the resources at that time. And Ontario and the federal government can help pay the interest or the principal, for receiving the repayment assistance plan. And it's also important to know that if a loan is not paid for 270 days, then at that point it would go into default and into collections. And there are loan rehabilitation programs available to students if they're looking to get their loan back in good standing. So that's the high level OSAP for for everyone. And now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the targeted supports for Indigenous learners. So as mentioned, Indigenous students are exempt from the fixed student contribution. And this can result in additional grant and loan support each year, which could be up to $3,600. To receive this benefit, a student would need to submit supporting documentation to confirm their Indigenous identity. Another targeted benefit that you might be aware of is that Ontario no longer considers PSSP as a funding resource when looking at a student's OSAP entitlement. So what this means is that OSAP is no longer reduced by the amount of PSSP that a student receives. You might also be familiar with the Ontario Indigenous Travel Grant, which is available to support the high travel costs of traveling from remote First Nations communities to post-secondary schools. So this is available for students who are traveling from Zone 3 and Zone 4 communities, and it also can support their the travel costs for their spouses or children if they're living with them during the school year. And beyond the Ontario Indigenous Travel Grant, there is OSAP funding available to support with general travel costs as well. So this would be included in the OSAP assessment. There's the return travel allowance, which is for single dependent students who are living more than 30 kilometers away from their family home. And there's also the Ontario Student Grant distance component. So we sometimes call this OSG distance. And this is available for students who have high transportation costs because their permanent residence is 80 kilometers away or more from the furthest or from the post-secondary institution of the type that they are attending. And so there could be either a commuting component for this or a travel component for this. And both the return travel allowance and the Ontario Student Grant distance component are automatically considered in the OSAP assessment. If a student has completed their OSAP assessment and there are additional local travel costs that aren't being, that I feel are greater than the assessment, then they could also complete a review or a request for review to adjust their local travel allowance. And so to do that, they would need to fill out a form and work with their financial aid office, but this is designed to address if they have significant commuting costs or local travel costs that aren't included in their assessment, but this would be an extra form that they would need to work with their FAO to complete. And then a few other targeted funding sources that are good to be aware of would be the Indigenous Student Bursary, the First Generation Bursary, and the Bursary for Students with Disabilities, and the Canada Student Grant for Services and Equipment for Persons with Permanent Disabilities. So the Indigenous Student Bursary is designed to provide support to Indigenous students with financial need. And the First Generation Bursary is designed to support students who are the first in their families to attend post-secondary and also financial need. And all of these would be completed with a separate application. And again, a student could work with their financial aid office, or you could work with the student and their financial aid office on how to apply for these programs. Now, as Jennifer mentioned, 2021 is a very unique year. So there are a few different pieces that are in place for this year in particular. So to ease the financial burden on OSAP borrowers during the pandemic, the government has introduced an OSAP student loan moratorium. So from March 30th to September 30th of 2020, borrowers were not required to make any payments on their OSAP loans, and interest did not accrue on their OSAP loans. For students who are still experiencing financial challenges, the repayment assistance plan remains available to help students in that position. There are also a number of changes to the federal component of student financial assistance. So the maximum Canada student loan amount actually increased this year from a weekly allowance of $210 to $350. And the student and spousal contributions, so two of the components that were in the resource column in that earlier slide, those have been removed from the assessment for 2021 only. And then there have also been increases to the Canada Student Grants. So the maximums doubled for a number of Canada Student Grant programs for this year. So you'll see in particular that the Canada Student Grant for full-time students, it increased from $375 to $750 per month. And the Canada Student Grant for part-time students increased from $1,800 to $3,600 per loan year. Now, to see what this actually looks like, I know it can get a little lost in the numbers here. We've got a couple of scenarios for you as well. So what we're looking at here is a dependent student who is in a university program, an arts or science program. They're living at home with their family, and their parental income is $60,000 per year for a family of 4. So if you look at last year's assessment versus this year's assessment, you'll see that the overall amounts are fairly similar. There's a slight increase in 2021 for some of the indexed maximums. But most significantly, you'll see that the federal grant portion of this has increased. So the federal grants this year for identical assessment are doubled, although and then you can see that the total amount remains the same, but the amount of loan that a student is carrying would be significantly decreased. When we look at an example of an independent college student who is living away from home and has a student income of $20,000 a year, you'll see something very similar. So the total amount of funding that they received from 1920 to 2021 would be pretty similar. Again, slightly increased for just the indexed maximums, so the year-over-year increases. But you'll see that the federal grants doubled again, so from just under $3,000 to just under $6,000. And then in this third scenario, you can see the example of a college student who is a sole support parent with 2 children, has an income of $50,000 per year. And again, their overall amount of funding has nudged up slightly, but most significantly, their federal grant funding has doubled. So in this case, some of the federal funding has displaced some of the provincial funding, but overall, their grant funding is over $2,000 or $2,000 more in grant than they would have had in similar assessment last year. So I hope that helps to paint some of the pictures of what those abstract numbers and the weekly maximums that we talk about. This is what this actually looks like on the student, from a student perspective. So that is our bare bones OSAP 101 kind of presentation. I'm going to bring your faces back up again so I can see everybody. There we go. And I'm happy to keep sharing the screen, but we can also just go back to our faces now as we continue to chat. If there are any questions about the presentation, I know there's a lot of information in there. I'd be happy to take those now.
Okay, so there is a question. It's not really, I guess it really doesn't relate to the presentation and the money, the charts that you showed, but this is from, I don't even know who the person is who asked the question. Chazin is the last name. And I had an interesting question from a student this morning. If the student had an outstanding OSAP owing from the previous application, oh my God, somebody just switched the screen here. I mean, no, it's
that was me.
owing from the previous application, would an awarded bursary from the ministry be applied to the OSAP loan first, or is the amount owing to the OSAP the responsibility of the student?
So I see this is in the chat as well.
Yes.
Okay.
So that is the question. Whoever asked that question, maybe you want to just unmute your mic and.
I am here. Sorry, I should have stopped before you got through all that.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a question from a student this morning. I know you explained a whole bunch of other stuff there just now, but they attended college before, and they had gotten OSAP for that program, and they're attending college again. They've got more OSAP, I believe, or they still have outstanding OSAP or something. Now, if they're attending now at the college, would an awarded bursary this year be applied to that OSAP? Like, would you take it, is what I'm saying.
So Frankie, I can take this, so maybe you can get a little break and get a glass of water. So the quick answer is no. So we wouldn't. So what happens is, like, if you think of the years as like siloed kind of years, so when they're completed all of their studies is when they will go into repayment. So, and that's when, for each year that we've provided funding to them for, they'll have to pay us back. If they were, depending on how long that break was, where they got the bursary or where they got the loan initially, if they did at some point go into repayment in between then and when they've started studies now, like for 2021, their loans go into what we call continuation of interest-free status. So they go back into the no interest accumulating, as Frankie had kind of mentioned, and it all starts again, I think, is kind of a way to think about it. But we wouldn't take the funding that we've provided to them for this year to pay off an outstanding loan from a previous year.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm talking about the Indigenous bursary that's handed out every year, that like the colleges apply for, and it's distributed to students, right? This student has an outstanding loan with OSAP, and they're now attending college again, but in a different program. Now, if she applies for that Indigenous bursary this year, that's her responsibility to pay you back, right? She would get that bursary in hand.
Yeah, but she doesn't have to use that bursary to pay off her OSAP loan, though, right? Because the intent of that bursary would be to pay for, I think, her post-secondary costs. So we wouldn't expect that it would go toward her OSAP. If she's in full-time studies, there'd be no expectation that she'd be using that bursary to pay us off. And by us, I just mean the ministry, not, you know.
Okay, she wasn't going to apply for the bursary. And I'm trying to talk her into applying for the bursary, because I said it will help you get through your school year. And she says, well, I have outstanding OSAP loans. They're just going to take it on me.
No, and sorry, Emily or Frankie, like, if I'm off on this, you can let me know, but I want to say I can bet my job on this, that we have no authority. We would not. And I'm glad you're encouraging her to apply, because there's a lot of bursaries and a lot of programs out there, like we're seeing with the travel grant, and people like Indigenous students aren't applying for some of these funding envelopes that are available. So we wouldn't. And the call's recorded, so you can use that.
Perfect. Okay. That's all I wanted to know. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Okay, so there's some other questions here in the chat, and I really want to make sure that we answer all the questions that came from the ONECA people. I think you got, Luann, did you send Jennifer the questions ahead of time? So some of the, and I don't know that you can answer them, but hopefully so. So one of the questions here in the chat is from Yolanda. She says, can you explain, please explain the circumstances as to when a grant would become a loan, converted to a loan?
Sure. So I know we had planned before the call, like, just in terms of giving us all a chance, but grant to loan is Frankie's file. So I'm happy to answer, Frankie, or do you want to?
I'm happy to. I was about to jump in line. So there are essentially three situations when a grant would be converted to loan. So the first is if a student withdraws within the first 30 days of their program. That's when a grant would be converted to loan. The second would be when there's a change in their circumstances resulting in a reassessment where they've been overpaid in grant. So most often we see this as either someone drops a significant number of courses, or they receive maybe a scholarship that should be considered as a resource in OSAP mid-year, and that impacts their assessment. Then in that kind of situation, they would have more grant than they were entitled to. So in that case, the grant would become converted to loan. And then the third case would be where their income is not verified. So the first two that I talked about, withdrawing within the first 30 days or the change in circumstances, that would be both their Ontario portion and the federal portion of their grants would convert. But if their income is not verified, then in that situation, just the Ontario portion of their grants would convert.
Okay.
Hi,
There-
Frankie.
Hi.
It's Terry Abelson from the financial aid world,
He's not an ONECA. This is
who is a friend of ONECA, and ONECA invited me. I just wanted to jump in with the grant to loan conversion, because one of the things that our partners continue to struggle with is if a student withdraws, specifically related to the 30 days, if a student withdraws within the first 30 days, their entire grant is converted to a loan. But it's important to make it very clear that if that student withdraws after those first 30 days, a portion of their grant is converted to a loan. And often in sessions when the information is given and we discuss simply the first 30 days, in fact, it even happened to financial aid people when we first went to grants up front. We thought that if they withdrew on day 31, their grants didn't get converted to loans. And I remember being involved in a meeting with some of our ONECA partners several years ago. And everybody left that meeting thinking, well, as long as my student stays in school for 30 days, then their grants aren't going to be converted to loans. Then all the grants started being converted to loans, and everybody was mad. And one of my dear friends from one of the First Nations near Sault Ste. Marie said, if it sounds too good to be true, I know it is. And she was really, really upset. So I think it's really important when we talk about those first 30 days that we go on to explain the days after those first 30 days. Thank you.
Yeah. And I've just posted in the chat as well the short version of what I just said too. So you can certainly take that back, or link to have that on our WhatsApp page.
Okay, so another question that was posed here to ONECA that I'm putting out to you was around the sponsorship letters and the post-secondary institutions receiving those sponsorship letters. And I know that probably you cannot solve this problem, but maybe give some kind of direction as to what we should be doing to rectify the situation. So what happens is the sponsorship letter goes to the post-secondary institution. And then if a student applies for OSAP, often their OSAP dollars are held until the payment is made by the First Nation. So some of the institutions believe that the OSAP should be the first payer, and they totally ignore the fact that the sponsorship letter is sitting on their desk and it's been sent by the First Nation informing them that they are going to cover that tuition for the students. So the post-secondary institutions continue to ignore those sponsorship letters, and the fact that that sponsorship letter is really a binding contract between the First Nation, a commitment to pay that student's tuition. And so what happens is the student gets caught in the middle of all of this, and their bursaries and their scholarships are held up by the institutions. So I don't know if there needs to be a directive from the OSAP office or from the ministry to the institutions. And this is nothing new. I think, you know, this conversation and this exact same thing came up when we were having these conversations at the FNUC and had the planning committee working on this work. So I don't know, where do we go from here with that?
Yeah, and this is where, Roxanne, like at the outset, like in the introductory remarks, because we did see this one come in, and I do think it's a dialogue with this group and then with the financial aid offices, because I'm hoping you can understand, like, the ministry doesn't have authority to tell schools you have to do X. I think we can provide guidance and advice, and like happy to put out another portal posting to the financial aid offices. Because I know we had done this previously, where we were kind of advising them, you know, where you get the sponsorship letters, can you follow the direction that's in the sponsorship letters as to which is the first payer of the tuition? Like, is it PSSSP, is it OSAP? Because we know it varies with the First Nations or with the band as well as with the institution. So like, I was wondering, is it working at some institutions and with some First Nations education counselors or with some bands? Because can we explore maybe some best practices, and we can outline that as well in the posting. I do think it's a bridging or a communication that we need to have together with our financial aid offices. But I do think a first step is maybe if we can hear about where it's working well and maybe use some of that to help and to guide and to advise.
Well, I think, you know, there are best practices out there, and I do know of some. But I think, you know, it needs to be, there has to be some kind of directives or some kind of something put out to all of the financial institutions, whether it's a step-by-step, how to handle a sponsorship letter, who's the first payer, you know, something needs to go out there. And whether, you know, and maybe we can work with you guys, I'm not sure how that would work, but I don't want to say that it's only happening here and there, because, you know, then you're leaving it open for judgment. And, you know, like right now during COVID, people are not working from home, things are changing. It's easier if institutions and organizations have clear direction on how to handle this, so that the students aren't getting caught up in this conversation and getting their funding cut. Like, I had a student call me crying the other day because the OSAP said she got information, and this is an institutional thing, it has nothing to do with you, but it comes back to the student was had got OSAP dollars, and then all of a sudden they said, oh no, you don't qualify for that, and they ended up having to pay it all back within 5 days. The letter said you need to pay that back in 5 days. So, you know, like, I don't know I don't know where to go with this.
Yeah, so as I kind of just think about the issue in my head, and I know it's a directive you want, but it's just that OSAP in itself doesn't control the processes at each institution, right? So if it would be helpful, like, I'd be happy to reach out to like the OASFA, so like the financial aid office executive, and get like maybe 2 or 3 FAOs to work with maybe 2 or 3 members from ONECA, and we can work through a portal posting with maybe like I don't even know if it could be steps, but I guess it could be steps if your institution can follow this process. Like, in terms of what the ministry can do, maybe it's more that bridging, and we can develop this together, like in collaboration with the schools as well, like with the financial aid offices, as to what that communication looks like. Because if it's just from the ministry, then it's going to be the same communication that we provided before, which I know doesn't seem to be helping in some cases, or in a lot of cases, unfortunately.
Okay.
Would that, like, do you want, I'm happy to do that, reach out.
I think we need to do something, you know, to try to clear up the muddy waters, you know, and, you know, there's some really good practices out there. We can reach out to some of the institutions who I know are doing a really good job, and get their support, and helping maybe create a framework, or I don't know, a directive. I don't want to call it a directive, because I can't really tell anybody what to do, but I mean, you know.
Neither can we, that's the thing.
You know, but you know, even just a best practices sheet, you know, or, you know, and try to break down some of this communication barrier, because our students are getting caught up in it, and you know, right now they're dropping out because of COVID, and we certainly don't want them, you know, to increase those dropout rates because of OSAP. Okay, so Debbie Dolson has a question over here. Debbie, you're on.
Okay. Oh, good morning, everyone. My question was, a lot of my students are really hesitant to apply for OSAP. I've been trying to promote it because I know there's resources available to the students, but they are hesitant to apply, and they are hesitant to go to the financial aid offices at their schools. And I was wondering if it would be possible for me to start a relationship as the post-secondary counselor with OSAP, And for me to have these additional forms for the bursaries and the travel grants, that I can work with the students to help them access OSAP better, because our community is within further than 80 kilometers to any post-secondary institution. So all of my 40 students who are living in community would qualify for the travel grant, and I know not very few of them are even accessing that program.
Hi, Debbie. That pains me to hear that last part, honestly, because yeah, it just, I know that there's like a great resource in terms of funding available. So just a couple of pieces. So all our OSAP forms, just so you know, are available on our website. So it's not like, you can access all the forms from that ontario.ca/OSAP link that Frankie had mentioned in her presentation. In addition to that, like if you yourself need support as you're kind of working through it with the student, I mean, obviously my first comment would be that you should reach out to the financial aid office at the institution. They are our point of contact, like they administer the program. They know it better than most of us know it because they're the workers, right? But in addition to that, we have, like, as part of the work that we did on the COO steering committee, we did dedicate like a ministry resource to provide support specifically like to, well, I wouldn't say to Indigenous students, but to education counselors and to the FAOs specific to the benefits that are available and the targeted supports. So we can reach out to the program admin staff in Thunder Bay and provide that name. I just want to confirm, because I know it used to be Sherry Britton and she's moved on. I think she's at, I don't know where she's gone to. She's gone, I think, to work specifically with, I believe, a First Nations community. But we can find out who that contact is now that has replaced her. So we can provide a direct kind of point of contact for you there.
Okay.
That'll be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm from the London area, so I don't know if you have different regions within OSAP and if there's a person in my area.
Yeah, we don't have like regional offices the same way that some other programs do. We've got like our one mighty team in Thunder Bay, and then we've got like the policy kind of teams that work out of Toronto, but she would be the one contact. And just to kind of note, it's part of her work. It's not like we don't get additional staff. And I know this is being recorded, so Roxanne, this better never get out anywhere. We get tasked additional tasks, right? We don't get additional staff to help out with it though. But we'll get you her information.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
Okay, Kathy Marsden.
Hey, sorry, if I may, because this jumps off of one of the questions that came in ahead of time as well. There was one of the questions that Luann sent us was regarding information that might be available to support ONECA members as you work with students. And so in addition to what Jennifer said, one of the other resources that we can offer is we have a couple of one-pagers that we've been developing over the years for different supports and to help address some common questions that come up. So a few of the supports that were mentioned in the presentation, like the Ontario Indigenous Travel Grant, the exemption from the student fixed contribution and the documentation requirements for that. We have existing one-pagers for that we can certainly share. And if there's other specific topics that students are coming to you with, we can always work to develop additional ones that might be meaningful.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, Kathy Marsden.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, so my question is, do students still need to report their band funding when applying for OSAP, even though it doesn't count as a resource for them?
So hi, Kathy, it's Emily. I can answer that one. When we stopped using P+P as a resource about 3 years ago, we did remove the question on the OSAP application where students previously reported their P+P. So it's no, the students do not need to report their P+P band funding on the OSAP application.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, so I'll just add to Emily's part, and I'm sorry, I know we have like 10 other questions, is that I actually think on the application, right in one of the Stellit links, it'll tell them do not report. Like I think if you hover over, it tells them what not to report, and it includes the PSSP, just as you're working through it.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Jennifer Linklater. You have to unmute your phone. Are you? Okay.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, I was looking at watching the slides, and I wasn't sure what areas qualified for that additional travel. It just said areas, I think it said 3 and 4, and I was just wondering what areas that covers.
So I can take this? Oh, yeah, I presume. Okay, I'll take it. Because I feel like I had part in creating this grant, which is why it makes me sad that students who could use it aren't using it. So what it is when we did create the grant with the steering committee, it's the fly in, fly out communities as listed by INAC, so by the federal government. So those are the zones, the communities, the First Nations communities within the zones are those communities that would be eligible for the grant. So if the student is flying in or flying out from there, they could be eligible for the OITG, the travel grant. And there is, and maybe, Frankie, I don't know if you can pull it in, maybe just include the link in here. The federal government does have a link. Can you nod? Is that right, Frankie? Yeah. So they do have a link to those communities so that you'd be able to see which First Nation community falls under those zones. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I see Rita Winter Duncan has her hand up there, but I'm going to go to Carly and then I'm coming to you, Rita. Okay, so Carly, where are you?
I'm here, thank you.
Okay.
So you did mention that if income isn't verified, that grants will convert to loans. By what point does income have to be verified in the process? And are students notified as of this date, if your income isn't verified, it's going to convert? And as a kind of a side question, if a student is dependent and one of their parents earns tax-free money, how does that affect the process? And do they have to verify that income if it's tax-free?
Okay, we've gotten that's a good question. So there were 2 parts to it, so you might have to remind me of the second part in a second.
Yeah.
But the timing for the income verification is that the student has 1 year from the start of their study period for their income to be verified. So if a student starts in September, say 2020, then they have until, just the way it works out, it's a year and a month. They have until if their grant's going to be converted, then it would happen as early as the October of the following year. So for a lot of students, that means that if there were maybe outstanding processes with the Canada Revenue Agency for their taxable income to be verified, it gives them some time to work through that. But then the other part of your question was regarding non-taxable income. Okay? So if you think of the equation that was in the presentation, where it's costs minus resources equals financial need, that's really one of the fundamental principles of OSAP. So even though some income would be, income earned on reserve might not be taxable, we would still look at that as a resource from an OSAP perspective, just to complete that equation. So the student would be asked in the application about Canadian non-taxable and foreign income. So they would put that in there'd be like a box for their taxable income and then a box for their non-taxable or foreign income. And if there's any additional documentation that would be required, then there's a form that prompts up that they could complete at that point.
Okay. So, I mean, if their parent works at the band office and they would need to verify that income somehow. So, I mean, what is acceptable? A letter from the band stating that their mother earned this much throughout the year? I'm just worried about the verifying tax-free income, because it's not just easy like going on CRA, printing off a document, right? I think verifying that non-taxable income, I worry about that for our students, because I think a lot of them are in that boat and worried about their grants converting to loans because they can't verify the income.
Yeah, I'm actually just pulling up the form.
So as Frankie kind of goes through that, Carly, on the form itself, it lists what students can provide, and an employer letter is sufficient along with the form.
Okay.
Right, Frankie? I think it's probably stated right on there, yeah?
Just verifying exactly that, yeah. So there are a couple links that I can get to you. So one for the INAC, the zones, which I'm just digging up as well. And we can certainly send you the link to this form. And as these come up, it might actually be more meaningful for us to send these in a follow-up email with some quick resources.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Rita, you've had your hand up so patiently. I bet your arm's getting tired by now.
Super tired.
Super tired, all right.
I'm a student, and also I'm working with students from up north. I had to come back work for part-time because I couldn't apply OSAP. I was gonna apply for OSAP this year, but I couldn't, and it wouldn't let me pass through after I submitted my SIN number. So I tried to contact the Thunder Bay office, you know, those Indigenous workers. No one replied back to me, no call, no email. And I went to the financial aid office at Lakehead. So they finally, after a couple of days, finally someone got back to me. And so they didn't know why I couldn't go past that SIN number. And so the financial aid contacted OSAP and told me that, you know, I guess there was already like a OSAP like login and everything that I did way back when, but I never really like applied for OSAP then. So what they recommended for me to do is to manually apply. You know how many pages that is? Like 64 pages. I said, forget it. I'm gonna go look for part-time work. So my question is, I can't work like part-time in January till I'm done the program. Am I able to apply from January until I'm done?
Hi, Rita. So first, I'm sorry to hear that. So one, yes, you'll be able to apply for January, but I think what might be happening just based on the situation, as you've explained it, is I think that there was probably a login associated with your account from when you probably previously had OSAP. And it's probably just that the requirements for the password reset need to be met. So, because I do know that we had quite a few students in this situation when COVID kind of happened because they couldn't go in to talk to their financial aid office to have that reset. I think that's what it sounds like to me, is the holdup on your account. Except if you were able to enter your SIN. Yeah, I think we'd probably need to have someone look into what has happened, or maybe talk to the FAO at Lakehead. I'm just trying to think of how we can connect.
Like I have talked to the financial aid. That's all they were directed was they sent me that big document, and I'm like, I'm not gonna do it now.
Yeah, no, you shouldn't.
I'm busy.
Please go ahead, sorry. Okay. I'm sorry, Rita, I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you have anything else you wanted to say?
Oh, no.
Okay. Yeah, I really think it's the password reset issue. that seems to be happening. Once that can be reset, you won't have to fill out the paper application. We'll need to connect with the program administrators in Thunder Bay, just because they've been responsible, or there's a unit in Thunder Bay that's been responsible for kind of helping students with this. I'm just surprised that the FAO at Lakehead wasn't able to do this for you. So maybe.
Yeah, and like to this day, no one has contacted me from the Indigenous OSAP office.
Okay, so Roxanne, maybe we can connect and I can just get some information, because I think on screen I can see Rita's name.
Yeah.
I just want to get her full information, just to have some kind of a reach out with the Lakehead FAO, because I do, from the sounds of it, I think it's probably something more simple than having to apply through a 64-page paper.
Definitely. I can connect you guys by email if that's okay with you, Rita.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm okay with it.
Perfect. Now I'm going to go to Luann over here. She has some questions that have been sent in by ONECA folks, and I want to make sure that they're addressed. And then I saw somebody, Annette had her hand up, a real hand up, so we're going to go to Annette next. Luann.
Okay. Hello, Jennifer, Frankie, and Emily. It's nice to meet you. Sorry, my device doesn't say my name, Luann, that you recognize me with. But anyway, it's me. Been sitting here listening. I was just looking over the 4 questions we sent you, and they're kind of like, I think much of it has been covered. Some are more scenarios than anything. And one is, can you mandate or advise the institutions? And you said you can't do that. Roxanne tried to do that. She couldn't do it either. So I guess we can't do that. But it's because of these scenarios, because of the reason that we're here in this situation is because our students are falling through the cracks. You just heard from Rita. It's like, it's not of our fault that our students are falling through the cracks, but if we're going to advocate and assist our students as best we can, we need all of the information. So is there a source of information that can be shared or accessed by all the parties? I mean, you're responding to our questions here and you're saying, here's a link for that. And you respond to the next question and we can provide you information. Just give us the information. I really, really liked Debbie's question. Why can't ONECA as an organization with all of these members be a program administrator for OSAP? Why can't it happen? Why can't, yeah, I'll let you respond to that one. Then I'll go for it. Why not?
So I'll start with decisions like that are made above my pay grade. I can assure you. I've been with OSAP for 10 years now. I know that the schools are our administrators. I know that there's a lot of complicating and complex interactions between that. I am not the person who can make a decision as to whether ONECA gets to be a program administrator. The schools administer the program for us. That's how it's delivered now.
Then why?
The ministry, the government has made that decision. We've got regulations that bind us to that. We've got privacy implications that we need to deal with. It's not like a blanket kind of yes or no. Like these are long established processes that have been around for decades. And other than to say that institutions are the administrators right now, that's the current relationship. That we can't perhaps carve out a relationship for ONECA with the ministry, I think is probably something a bit different, but I can take it back. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, we asked the question, you can take it back and we can go over your head now because we asked the question, right?
100%.
Whatever that means. But
okay, folks,
you did.
Go
You
ahead.
you did say that you are aware there needs to be some work with financial aid offices at those institutions to bridge that communication or to address communication needs. When will that happen, and can ONECA be involved? And I guess one other question, because you said you have these one page or these short posts that you send to financial aid offices, can ONECA not receive what you send out to financial aid offices so that we're in the loop at least?
So a couple of points that I'll address there, Luann. The one about the bridging piece, right? Like, I hope you understand that the reason I make the comment is because we take the issue seriously that ONECA is bringing to us, right? If there's some kind of bridge building that we can do between the financial aid offices and ONECA, I would completely respect that and I would want to do that. It's what we were doing with the COO steering committee by inviting OASFA to join that committee. So for the second phase of that, we had 3 or 4 financial aid officers come to the meetings. I'm happy to kind of get that going again if it'll help with the first payer issue. As to when it happens, I will touch base with Roxanne and I'll touch base with the chair at OASFA and we'll get something going. On the second piece, the one pagers, those were specifically in response to a request from the steering committee. It's not something that we do for the financial aid offices. It's something that we do for these stakeholders. So happy to send those to ONECA or like through Roxanne or through whomever makes the most sense. They were very much tailored to help education counselors.
That'd be great if that could be shared to Roxanne, right, Roxanne?
That would be perfect.
Thank you.
It's getting it's pretty scary to think that ONECA would be administering the OSAP. That's just like who came up with that idea? It's probably not a good one. But I do agree with what Jordan is saying here. And it has nothing to do with ONECA administering any of it. It's building those better relationships, maybe sending those student bursaries and stuff directly and working with the Indigenous student services at their institutions. I don't know how that works. Probably every institution does their own thing, but I think that's a good process. And, you know, it really does help build relationships between the students and those Indigenous institutional, their staff, and it gets the students going to the center, then they start accessing. So that is a great way to, you know, to start engaging the students more with the staff as well at the institutional level. And then Yolanda has a question. Do you have an email list that we could sign up for in order to get the updates from your office? Similar to those that are emailed regularly to the financial aid office. Now,
So, sorry, go ahead, Rex.
Go ahead.
Oh, just 2 things. I kind of wanted to piggyback on your first comment, and I think you had mentioned that Jordan had made the comment in the thread. Like, I know I made the joke about Terry not being ONECA, but I think it's fantastic that you've got an FAO coming. Like, I would say, why not invite more financial aid offices? And again, happy to have the ministry involved in as well, but this helps the bridge building. This helps, like, I was reading one of Terry's comments that OSAP's made the password reset easier. She knows more than I do about it because I'm 10 steps, like, back in the policy office, we're not working with the students. We're not working with the institutions the same way, right? So those the financial aid offices know much more about the inner workings of what's happening than those of us back in a Toronto office, because we're not dealing with the situation. So I do think it's fantastic that Terry's here. And if you can engage with more financial aid offices and invite them to these, I think it helps with that bridge building as well. Again, if we're the liaison, happy to do that as well. Sorry, I needed to piggyback on that because I think it's great. And then when I read Terry's comment, I'm like, see, she knows more than I do about the password reset.
Well, it's great because Terry has been a part of ONECA, even though she's not an ONECA member. We've relied heavily on her for many, many years. I think I've been back and forth with Terry for probably more than 10 or 15 years. You know, and so it's great to be able to reach out to people like her. You know, it would be nice if we had a better relationship with more financial aid offices and having clear, you know, being able to work together and communicate on issues around how do we create best practices for you know, handling those sponsorship letters. And you know, like I know that, you know, like in some of the bigger institutions, they may not, like they don't get an opportunity to really build relationships with the First Nations the way some of the smaller institutions do. You know, I think ONECA has a role to play here in all of this, you know, and that might be, you know, that whole communication, help bridge that gap in communication and building those relationships. I think that's our role, not to administer the OSAP dollars, but, you know, to help bridge that gap and you know, keep that communication flowing, you know, because that's important, you know. And I think that's where we have the biggest challenges.
And then just kind of on that second piece, and honestly, Roxanne, I really appreciate those comments, extremely helpful and like right in line too with what I'm thinking. And honestly, I think somebody who thinks that administering OSAP is easy, I'm sure could just talk to Terry. I don't think anyone outside of the school should be doing it because it is so complex and they've been doing it for decades. But that's me. The other piece on the request for like a contact, like an email list. So the information that we put out to financial aid offices is through like a secure portal, and it is very much about specific things that are required because they interact with the OSAP application itself and with the actual documents as they get processed through the system. I'm not sure if it would be helpful if we do some kind of like an email out to ONECA, like maybe, I don't think we could do it as regularly because we're literally just turning things out where we need to kind of advise FAOs, hey, heads up, this has happened, this is what you need to do with these restrictions. Like, I don't think it would be beneficial to ONECA because it is so into the weeds. But if there is information out there, similar to like the kind of the one pagers or more general kind of information, we can maybe set up like a quarterly email or like a semi-annual, like just with relevant kind of information, if that makes sense.
Well, I think, you know, like I wouldn't want to get bombarded every day with a whole bunch of emails that really don't apply to me. What the information we are looking for is things that will support our counselors on the ground helping their students, you know. So if there's new directives or new changes to OSAP, you know, that kind of information should be shared so that we can reach out to our counselors and say, hey, by the way, you know, when you're helping your student fill out their OSAP application, these are the changes.
Okay, so maybe we can connect on that because I do agree with you. I think stuff like that would be helpful. Probably things like when the feds increase their grants, like that kind of information, like the more general kind of knowledge, as opposed to like the specifics about how to fix someone's account if X or Y happens. But maybe we can figure out a schedule that works if it is every 3 months or something like that.
And I think having a list, you know, like we've been creating little databases over here to help support our counselors. You know, when they're sending their sponsorship letter, you know, who do we send this sponsorship letter to at the institution and stuff like that. So having a list of all those financial aid people, you know, so if there is issues, like a student's coming and saying, oh, well, they're holding up my OSAP money because, you know, the First Nation didn't pay, or they say they don't have your sponsorship letter, you know, then at least that counselor will have somebody to contact directly at the financial aid offices.
Okay,
so they're important.
I know we have a list on our website of all the financial aid offices. across Ontario. But if
do
you,
you have the actual people? Because I know very well, like, you can get held up in there for days, you know, nobody ever responds, or, you know, so I want names and numbers, you know, that we can provide to the counselors to contact Terry Abelson over at Sioux College, because she knows what, you know, she's the person responsible. Not contact the the registrar's office, and then they're going to pass you over to finance, and then they're going to pass you somewhere else. No, you know what I mean? We need
so
that list.
let me take it back, and I'm going to talk to OWASFA, because there are quite a few number of people who work, especially at the bigger institutions, right, in terms of who they would feel comfortable putting on this list. And just put it on the list of things that we need to get back to you on. Okay, let me just do that reach out first out of.
And my next question is maybe, like, when you're doing that and you're talking to these folks, ask them, do they have a dedicated person? Like, I know some of the institutions have dedicated people just to work with the First Nation sponsorship letters. So, like, I don't need 10 names if only one person is actually doing the First Nations. That's all I want to know about. I don't care about, you know, who handles the non-Indigenous people or anybody else.
Okay, fair enough. And Frankie and Emily, I'm hoping you're writing this stuff down, right? Okay.
Okay, do we have any more questions here in the comment thing? Because we're getting close to 12 o'clock now. Is there training or a lunch and learn type of event that can be developed, especially for financial aid offices? Terry, would you like to do a lunch and learn to talk about financial aid offices? We'll talk about that later.
I would love to.
Okay, see, there you go. See, this is how we get things done. ONECA, Terry has done workshops. Oh, somebody already said that. Okay, so there we go. Yes, I would like to attend. So it seems like there's a lot of interest in attending these workshops. So maybe that's something for our next organizing thing. So thank you. We're past 12 o'clock. We're keeping, oh, I forgot Annette. Okay, Annette, you're last. No more questions after Annette. I forgot, she had her real hand raised.
So I'm in the same situation as Rita with OSAP and being a post-secondary student. I've never applied for OSAP before in my previous education courses I took. And when I tried to get on the site, it's saying that I can't get on there because I already have a password or an OAN number, whatever. So I have to get the new one. I have to physically go to a place, or I have to send in all these, mail in these documents. And now it's saying that they can't provide me an OAN number or anything like that. So I wasn't able to apply for OSAP as well. So I have to work, right? I just like her, I just kind of said, screw it. It was too frustrating to deal with and try to go through that process.
Sorry, Annette, who's the financial aid office? What institution was it?
I'm through Yorkville University, but that's like in New Brunswick.
Okay. And Terry, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know that we had issues with the OAN, and I thought we did a lot to kind of mitigate these situations. But other than, like, I can get back to Roxanne on these two situations, but do you know specifically what they can do?
They have to, yeah, sure, no problem, Jennifer. And the ministry did listen to the financial aid and student concerns about the process that when it was happening over the summer. And in October, they made the process much simpler. So the student still has to connect with his or her financial aid office. So I've actually been speaking privately with Rita because she works for an institution that Sioux College is attached to. For the last lady who I've already forgotten your name, my apologies. Yeah. Because you are attending an out of province institution, it would be one of the ministry people. But it's very simple. You just have to connect with them and provide 2 things, not all of the stuff that we were originally asking for, and your social insurance number, and then they can look it up and they can fix it very quickly. The earlier process that was corrected in October took sometimes 6 or 7 weeks, so the process is definitely much quicker. If either, I've already connected with Rita, and I'd be happy to connect with anyone else that's having those problems. And then what I'll do until we can get you a list of who does what where, I'll put you in contact with the person that you need to be put in contact with. Give Jennifer some time to work on other policy corrections that we need.
And this is why we love our financial aid offices.
Hey, well,
that was a very comprehensive answer, but there's one thing I want to add, which is that Annette, I think you still have time. I'm not sure of your exact study period, but the deadline to submit your application is 60 days before the end of your study period. So if you're still there.
Yeah, I'm actually, I'm in my last year. So once my new semester starts in January, can I still apply? Like if I can get all of this straightened out by then? Because I mean, this is my 3rd year now and I graduate this year. So can I still do that? Because I'm so, on my last year.
Yeah, it sounds like you still have time.
Okay, thank you.
For this year's funding, just so you know, not for the past 2 years, but for the 2020.
Yeah, no.
Just
okay, thank you.
okay, so it's 12:15 now, and I know that we were only scheduled till 12. So I want to thank everybody, and I want to thank our ministry folk here, Jennifer, Frankie, and Emily, for being here and answering all of our questions. And if you have other questions, maybe you forgot about, I'm saving it in the chat room here. But if you have other questions, you can just forward them on. I will connect with Jennifer and I'll connect her and Rita together there. And so I want to remind everybody that Luann's left the house here. She's left me high and dry, but she did send you an evaluation form. And so could everybody please fill that out and send it back. And now we're back to our weekly draw. Okay, so I didn't do the wheel, so here's our prize. It's not golf balls or chocolate bars today. So here we go. Anne-Marie Jones. You're the winner. Okay, thank you very much. And don't forget, next week we have a lineup of, I think it's Diane Hill and young Miller boy. So anyway, thank you all. Have a good day.
Bye, everybody.
See ya.
Everyone, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.